The machines beeped in soft, steady intervals. My mother's breathing was shallow, more labored now than it had been just an hour before. Her skin had taken on that waxy paleness I wasn't ready to name. I sat beside her, holding her hand as gently as if it were glass, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. I had been there for 2 days straight. No sleep, barely any food. I didn't want to leave her side. Not for coffee, not for fresh air. Not even when the nurses told me to take a break. Because I knew, deep down, I wouldn't get another chance. My brother Jason and his wife Megan had arrived earlier that morning. They breezed into the room with coffee cups in hand, their jackets still smelling faintly of rain and something expensive. Megan wore sunglasses on her head, like this was some casual brunch meetup instead of the last hours of a woman's life. They said their hellos. Jason kissed our mother's forehead and sighed dramatically. "She's not really here anymore," Jason had said, shrugging to Megan. "She can probably still hear you," I'd replied, trying to keep my voice level. He didn't answer. He just sat. And now, hours later, they stood a few feet away near the window, whispering to each other. I didn't want to listen. I tried not to. But grief dulls your defenses. You hear things you shouldn't. Jason's voice, low and sharp. "When it's done, we'll split it. She doesn't need to know." Megan nodded. "We'll just say it's what Mom would have wanted." I froze. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. They say if you've ever been betrayed by family, hitting like brings peace, subscribing brings clarity, and commenting brings karma to those who wronged you. Try it. And tell me where you're watching from. Anyways. My mother was still alive, still here, and they were already dividing her life like a pie at a table I hadn't been invited to. I turned my head slowly, my mother's hand still wrapped in mine. Her fingers twitched slightly, maybe a muscle spasm, or maybe something more. I looked at her face. Peaceful. Far away. But I swear, there was the faintest crease between her brows. As if even in that half-sleeping state, she knew what her children were saying. I swallowed the lump in my throat. There's a special kind of coldness in someone who can whisper about inheritance in a hospital room. While the woman who raised them lay fighting for breath, they were already calculating bank transfers. Jason chuckled softly at something Megan whispered back. I didn't hear the words. I didn't need to. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. I was hollow. Like the floor had dropped out from under me, and I was still somehow sitting there, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had changed. They thought they were being subtle, whispering, pretending to mourn. But I heard it all. The truth is, I always knew I was different from them. Jason and Megan, my golden brother and his glassy-eyed wife, had never struggled a day in their lives. My mother made sure of that. Even when she had little, she gave them everything. Private school, a down payment, vacations, clothes, bailouts. Me? I never asked for much. Maybe that was my mistake. I'd worked since I was 16, first in retail, then as a freelance designer, then slowly, quietly building my own business. I never told Mom the full extent of my success. I didn't want to worry her with my long hours or make her feel like she owed me something. But now, in that moment, I wished she could open her eyes, just once, just long enough to say, I heard them too. I wanted her to know I was still here, holding her hand, not asking for anything, not calculating what I'd get when she passed, just being with her. Jason and Megan moved closer to the bed, their voices softening even more. Jason said, "It's not like Lorraine needs much." "She's always been independent," Megan laughed. "She's too proud to accept anything anyway." They didn't know I could hear them. Or maybe they did, and they didn't care. I slowly stood, gently placing my mother's hand back on the blanket. I didn't say a word to them. I walked to the hallway, each step sharp with clarity. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't grief for them. It was greed. And whatever came next, whatever Mom had written in her will, I already knew the truth. They got what they wanted, but I was the one who stayed. I looked back once, through the narrow window in the hospital door. My mother's chest still rose and fell, faint but steady. I whispered, barely audible, "I'm still here, Mom." Then I turned and walked down the hallway, holding that silence like a shield around me, because I already knew this wasn't the end of the story. The funeral was as sterile as it was brief. There were flowers, yes, pale roses, and calla lilies arranged neatly at the altar. A slideshow of photos played over soft piano music. Most of them were of Jason and Megan, their wedding, their vacations, childhood birthdays where I stood just out of frame. I didn't cry. I'd cried everything I had the week before. After the service, while guests mingled near the punch table and the pastor made polite small talk, I stayed behind. In the stillness. Just me and the coffin. And the truth no one else seemed to notice. The next morning, Jason called, not to check in, not to see how I was coping. He said, "We're going through Mom's stuff at the house this afternoon. Figured you'd want to come." I hesitated. He added, "It won't take long." I almost said no, but I owed it to her. Not to them, but to her. To every cookbook stained with gravy. To every tea towel she'd embroidered with her initials. To every book she read and dog-eared with notes in the margins. I arrived before they did. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and dust. Quiet and already hollow. The framed family portraits on the wall were tilted from where guests had brushed past them during the post-funeral gathering. One photo of all three of us, me, Jason, and Mom, sat crooked on the hallway table. I adjusted it gently before moving into the living room. They came in a few minutes later, Jason carrying a cardboard banker's box, Megan in designer sunglasses, indoors. Jason said, "We'll start in her room." Megan added, "Let's just get through it." "I have a facial at 5. They weren't grieving, they were scavenging. Drawers opened, jewelry cases unlatched. Megan held up a silk scarf and said, "This would look good with my cream blazer." Jason rifled through the file cabinet and pulled out a beige envelope. He opened it without hesitation. Jason said, "It's the will." He skimmed, paused, read again. Then he smiled. Jason said, "Looks like she split it 3 ways." Megan leaned over his shoulder and read the page for herself. Megan said, "Even you." She looked at me like I was the stray dog they forgot was still on the porch. Jason added, "Well, fair is fair, I guess." I didn't respond. My voice had folded inward. An equal share, no message, no note, no, "Thank you for taking care of me when no one else did." No, "You were the one who stayed." Just 1/3. Jason closed the folder with a snap and tossed it onto the couch like it was junk mail. He said, "Guess we all got our share." Megan said, "She was always big on treating us the same." I wondered if that was what she thought she'd done. I excused myself and went upstairs, to Mom's bedroom. The bed was still neatly made, her favorite blanket folded at the foot. I sat on the edge, staring at the impression left in the pillow. It hit me all at once, this quiet erasure. Like I'd been reduced to a transaction. Equal on paper, invisible in memory. Later, I wandered into her closet. On the top shelf, tucked behind an old shoebox, was a framed photo of the 3 of us, Mom, Jason, and me. We were kids. She had her arms around us, smiling so wide it made her eyes disappear. I traced the glass with my thumb and whispered, "Did you really think I was just like them?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Back downstairs, Jason and Megan were already planning deposits. Jason said, "We should put a chunk toward the mortgage." Megan said, "I'm getting that espresso machine I showed you." I stood quietly, arms crossed. They didn't ask what I'd do with mine. They assumed they knew. Later that evening, I took a rideshare back to my apartment, the same modest 1-bedroom I'd lived in for the past 5 years. Small kitchen, no view, but it was mine. I dropped my bag on the counter and sat at my desk, opened my laptop. Invoices, code, design mock-ups, project timelines. My business, built slowly, steadily, late at night after long days at underpaid jobs. I'd kept going when no one believed I should. I hadn't told anyone how far it had come. I didn't do it for them. Still, something in me felt bruised, like all those years of effort, of dignity, of silence, had been dismissed in one signature, equal. I whispered, "Equal doesn't mean the same." The room was quiet, but something told me this story wasn't finished. Not yet. Long before the will. Long before the hospital. Long before Jason whispered greed into Mom's final breaths. I was building something no one else could see. At first, it was just survival. I worked 2 jobs after high school, one at a dry cleaner where I learned how to smile even when customers talked down to me, another bussing tables at a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and hash browns. I kept my head down, saved every tip, and came home too tired to cry. But I had a plan. At night, while the rest of the world watched TV or scrolled through their phones, I took classes online. Digital design, branding, typography. I borrowed a secondhand laptop and worked off borrowed Wi-Fi from the neighbor's unlocked network. I studied until my eyes burned. My first logo? It was for a friend's cousin's Etsy shop, $5 and a thank you note. Jason found out and said, "You're charging for clip art now?" Megan laughed and said, "That's cute, like arts and crafts with a credit card." I didn't respond. I was used to being underestimated. That logo led to another, then a business card design, then someone needed a website banner. Each project was small, but I poured everything into it. Because each one taught me something. I learned to listen, to solve problems creatively, to communicate. Eventually, I filed the paperwork to register my own LLC. I named it Glassbird Studio, after a broken glass bird figurine Mom had once glued back together and placed on my nightstand when I was sick. "Even broken things can be beautiful again," she'd said. My first real client came from a LinkedIn message. Then came a local cafe, then a wedding photographer, then a tech startup. They didn't care that I didn't have a fancy office. They cared that I delivered what I promised. On time, with heart. I built my business from my kitchen table, using sticky notes and dollar store pens. Every morning, I'd boil water for instant coffee, open my email, and tell myself, just one more step. When the pandemic hit, things slowed. But I pivoted. Helped small businesses revamp their branding, designed online menus for local restaurants, taught myself motion graphics just to stay relevant. I learned to be scrappy, efficient, and eventually I learned to lead. Now, I have a team, 3 designers, a project manager, and a part-time copywriter. We lease a cozy loft office downtown with plants in the windows and old hardwood floors. It smells like hope and lavender hand sanitizer. Jason doesn't know that. Megan doesn't ask. But I see it. The way our clients smile when we present their brand stories. The way my team buzzes with ideas around our whiteboard wall. The way I've created something lasting. From nothing. I didn't need the inheritance. I'd already bought my own freedom. There's a kind of peace that comes from knowing your worth without anyone else validating it. My siblings thought money made you powerful. But I know better. Power is waking up to something you built with your own 2 hands and watching it grow. I walked through the office that afternoon, barefoot because my heels had started blistering. Carly, our youngest designer, waved at me from her desk. Carly said, "Client loved the last mock-up. They're asking if you're available for a brand audit next month." I said, "Let's do it. Schedule the call for Thursday." I walked into the meeting room and paused by the gallery wall. Prints of our past projects, framed quotes from clients, and a watercolor of that same glass bird, painted by a grateful intern on her last day. I stood there, hand on the frame, and I whispered, she would have been proud of this. Not because I'd made money, because I'd made peace. It had been 6 months. 6 months since the funeral. 6 months since Jason and Megan split the checks and left the house without a backward glance. 6 months since Lorraine had tucked away the numbness and buried herself in her work, trying not to dwell on what her mother hadn't said. Until that Tuesday morning. Lorraine was halfway through her tea when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost let it go to voicemail. But something, some pulse of instinct, made her swipe to answer. "Hello?" Lorraine said. "Is this Lorraine Hart?" the voice asked. It was calm, professional, male. "Yes, speaking." "This is Nathan Patel. I'm an attorney. I worked with your mother, Julia Hart, on some private matters. I know it's been some time since her passing, but there's something she left for you that only recently came to light. I'd like to schedule a time to deliver it in person." Lorraine blinked, her fingers tightening on the mug. She said, "I thought the estate was already settled." Nathan said, "This is separate from the will. It was structured to surface only when a specific investment matured, and that just happened." An hour later, she was sitting in a quiet office, staring at an envelope sealed with wax. Nathan slid the folder across the table. Nathan said, "Your mother made a private investment in a hospitality development project about 10 years ago. It wasn't tied to the family accounts or the formal estate. She did it with funds from a trust she managed separately. Her instructions were to wait until the investment matured before dispersing anything. That happened last week." Lorraine opened the folder. Atop the paperwork was a smaller envelope, hand-addressed in her mother's careful, looping cursive, "To my Lorraine. For when the time is right." Her breath caught. She said, barely audible, "Is this—" Nathan said, "Her final letter. She wanted you to have it, not your siblings. She was very specific." He left the room to give her privacy. Lorraine stared at the seal for a long moment, then broke it with trembling fingers. The letter smelled faintly of lavender, her mother's favorite oil. The handwriting sloped gently across cream stationery, familiar and unmistakably hers. "My Lorraine. If you're reading this, then the plan worked. The others got what they came for. I knew they would. That's why I structured it that way. I gave Jason and Megan exactly what they needed, because they've never grown up. They spend faster than they save, and they treat family like a bank. I knew if they thought it was all there was, they'd move on. But you, my girl, you've already built something. You didn't wait for handouts. You created your own path, with grace, with grit, and without bitterness. That's why I left the rest in your hands. I wanted it to find you after the noise died down, after they'd stopped watching. I wanted you to have it without having to defend it. I believe in you. Use it well. I know you will." Mom Lorraine sat there, reading it 3 times, then a 4th. Her eyes blurred, but she didn't cry. Not at first. She just sat in the hush of that small office, holding the words like a fragile gift she didn't know how much she needed. She whispered, "You knew them better than I did." It wasn't just money. It was trust. It was a mother seeing her child clearly, maybe for the first time in years, and saying, "I see what you've become, and I'm proud of you." The remaining investment wasn't small. The paperwork detailed a sizable share in a coastal development project, still growing, but now liquid. Enough to change a life. Enough to build something lasting. Nathan returned and said, "Would you like help initiating the transfer?" Lorraine nodded. But even as she signed the documents, she wasn't thinking about the money. She was thinking about her mother's last words. "Use it well. I know you will." And for the first time since that whisper at the hospital bed, Lorraine felt peace, not because she'd won, but because she'd been seen. Lorraine didn't touch the money for a week, not out of fear or indecision, but out of reverence. She left the documents sealed in the safe she kept behind her office bookshelf. Every night, she would pause in front of it, hand resting on the wood, and whisper, "Not yet." Because it wasn't just a deposit, it was a message, a legacy, a second heartbeat from her mother, echoing in the silence. And Lorraine wanted to be sure that whatever she did next, it honored that. When she finally sat down to look at the numbers, her breath caught. It was more than she'd imagined, substantially more. She could buy a house on the coast. She could retire early. She could move across the world and disappear. Instead, she bought time and offered it to others. The first thing she did was expand her company. Lorraine said to her assistant, "We're bringing on 2 apprentices. Young, hungry, with no trust funds. Find me candidates from places like where I came from. Within a week, she had them. Maya, a brilliant illustrator from a rough neighborhood outside of Houston, and Devin, a soft-spoken animator who had been designing flyers for his church just to practice. Lorraine trained them herself. She said, I want you to see every corner of the business, not just the fun stuff, learn how it runs. They soaked it up like dry roots meeting rain. The next step came quietly, a small grant program for young creatives from low-income families. No strings attached, just a few $1,000s a year to help someone buy their first tablet, take their first design course, or rent studio space for the summer. Lorraine named it the Second Letter Fund. She didn't explain the name to anyone, not even her staff. It wasn't for public applause. It was for her. A private ritual, a quiet conversation. Every decision, every signature felt like sitting beside her mother again. Lorraine would pause, pen hovering over the paper, and whisper, "What do you think?" In her mind, she could still hear the answer. "I believe in you." Megan and Jason never asked, and she never told them. They were busy, too busy flaunting the checks they had received, posting about vacation homes and leased cars. Jason bought into a startup that folded in 6 months. Megan launched a lifestyle podcast that barely made it past episode 3. Lorraine watched it all from a distance. She said nothing. Because this part of her life, this quiet unfolding, it wasn't about them. It was never about them. She didn't need the recognition, but still, she wanted something to last, something that would speak when she wasn't there. So she returned to the hospital, the place where her mother had taken her final breaths, where Lorraine had first heard the whisper that started it all. She met with the director and said, "I'd like to donate a mural for the East Wing." She didn't hire an artist. She painted it herself, took a week off, came in every day before dawn, worked until her hands were stained and her back ached. The mural stretched across the wall in calming hues of rose and cream and soft blue, abstract shapes flowing into one another like memory and wind. At the center, a silhouette of a woman and child beneath a tree, and beneath it, in gold leaf paint, a single quote. "Use it well, I know you will." On the final day, Lorraine stepped back, arms splattered with color, and let herself breathe. A nurse passed by and said, "That's beautiful. Did your mother work here?" Lorraine smiled. She said, "No. She died here. But I think she still has something to give." The nurse nodded, touched. And Lorraine finally felt it. This peace, this rooted strength, didn't come from a check or a title or proving anything to anyone. It came from choosing not to become what they expected her to be, from being trusted and living up to it. It was late October when Jason called. Lorraine saw the name flash across her phone and nearly let it ring out. The last time she'd heard from her brother, it was to make sure she'd received her share, not to offer condolences, not to ask how she was coping, not even to say thank you for all the arrangements she'd handled after their mother passed. Just, "You got yours too." She stared at the screen for a moment. Then, curious, she answered. "Lorraine," Jason said, trying too hard to sound casual. "Hey, I was thinking we should get together sometime soon. Megan and I were talking, and we thought it'd be good to reconnect." Lorraine raised an eyebrow. Megan? The same sister who hadn't even hugged her at the funeral. The same one who rolled her eyes when Lorraine suggested keeping some of their mother's handmade quilts. She kept her voice even. "All right, when?" "Friday afternoon. There's a place halfway between us, Riverbend Cafe. Know it?" "I know it." "Great," he said quickly, like he was afraid she might change her mind. When she hung up, Lorraine sat there a while, phone still in her hand. She looked out the window of her apartment, small, modest, but warm, and whispered, "What are you really after, Jason?" Friday arrived gray and cold, the kind of day that makes people either rush or retreat. Lorraine chose neither. She walked slowly, scarf wrapped tight, thinking. Riverbend Cafe was quiet when she arrived. Jason was already there, sipping something from a chipped mug, scrolling on his phone. He looked up and smiled like nothing had ever happened. Hey, sis. Jason. A minute later, Megan arrived, fashionably late, dressed in athleisure and oversized sunglasses despite the clouds. She air-kissed Jason's cheek and barely nodded at Lorraine. Sorry I'm late, Megan said, sliding into the booth. Parking was a nightmare. Lorraine nodded politely. No worries. Jason tried small talk first. He asked about her work. Still doing those logos and brand things? He asked, as if those things hadn't built her a successful boutique agency. Lorraine sipped her tea. Still creating? Yes. Megan chimed in. I keep meaning to check out your site. We've just been so swamped. Jason's startup is going through a transition, and I've been managing everything at home. Lorraine smiled faintly. I'm sure. Jason cleared his throat. Actually, that's part of why we wanted to meet. Here it comes, she thought. We've hit a bit of a bump, Jason said. You know how unpredictable the market is. A couple bad quarters. We're looking at ways to stabilize. Megan leaned in. It's just been rough, and with the economy and everything, Jason added, we were wondering if you might be open to helping out. Just a short-term loan, nothing crazy, just enough to cover some immediate costs. Lorraine blinked slowly. You're asking me for money? Jason chuckled nervously. Well, you've always been the responsible one, and I mean, you probably have something saved up. Megan crossed her arms. It's not like we're asking for a handout. We'd pay you back. Lorraine set her cup down carefully. With interest? Jason hesitated. If that's important to you. Lorraine leaned back. She looked at them, really looked. Jason's designer watch was missing. Megan's nails were chipped. The tension in their shoulders wasn't just financial, it was personal. Their world was crumbling. She thought of the mural sketch at home, the youth grant proposal on her desk, the email she'd received from a school hoping to partner with her company. She thought of her mother's letter. You've already built something. That's why I left the rest in your hands. I believe in you. She looked at her siblings, and then she smiled. I'm focused on other things right now, Lorraine said. Jason blinked. So, is that a no? She tilted her head. It's a choice. Megan scoffed. We're just asking for help. No need to be smug. Lorraine's voice was calm. I'm not smug. I'm just no longer interested in being a safety net. Jason stood abruptly. Well, forget it. We'll figure it out ourselves. Megan followed, grabbing her coat. You know, Mom would have helped us. Lorraine stood too. She did help you, remember? They said nothing. She watched them leave the cafe, walking stiffly toward a car that probably wasn't fully paid for. That evening, Lorraine returned home and lit a candle beside the photograph of her mother on the bookshelf. The flame flickered softly, casting light across the small space where she kept reminders of who she was and who helped her become it. She opened her sketch pad and began working. The outreach mural was starting to take shape, hands passing light to one another, a symbol of giving without losing. She heard her mother's voice in her memory. You don't have to shine the loudest, just shine. That night, as the city hummed outside her window, Lorraine worked late into the evening. She had things to build, and no one to ask permission from. The park was quiet that morning. Mist curling around the trees, sunlight slicing through it in golden strands. Lorraine sat down slowly on the bench she and her mother used to share. The wood had worn smooth from years of use. She could almost see the outline of her mother's hand resting beside hers, the two of them huddled close with paper cups of tea, watching ducks skim across the pond. She took out the letter again. It was folded neatly, creases softened by constant handling. The ink had started to fade in a few places, but she had every word memorized. Still, she read it again, like she always did. Not because she needed to remind herself of what it said, but because it felt like hearing her mother's voice again. I gave your siblings what they needed, because they've never grown up. But you, my girl, you've already built something. That's why I left the rest in your hands. I believe in you. Lorraine blinked slowly, her breath clouding in the crisp morning air.
"Hi, Mom," Lorraine said aloud. "I did it." The last few months had changed everything. Not in the way wealth often changes people. No luxury cars, no designer handbags, no champagne-drenched celebrations. It changed her like the first ray of sunlight after a long winter. Quiet, warm, gradual. It gave her the space to breathe, to grow, to give back. And in every step, she carried her mother with her. She remembered all the evenings they spent here. Lorraine in her hoodie and jeans, her mother in that old navy coat with the frayed cuffs. They'd talk about dreams, Lorraine's business plans, her frustrations, her goals. Her mother never offered flashy advice, just presence, just care. "She always listened," Lorraine whispered. No performance, no manipulation, just someone who saw her for who she was and loved her anyway.
She remembered the last time they were at this bench together. Her mother's hair had started thinning from the treatments, her skin pale, but her eyes were as fierce as ever. "You know what I see when I look at you?" her mother had asked. Lorraine shook her head, tearing up at the memory. "I see someone who never needed permission to be extraordinary." And that was the thing. Megan and Jason had always waited for permission, for handouts, for shortcuts. They mocked Lorraine's drive, her determination, because it reflected their own emptiness back at them. But their mother? She saw past it all. Lorraine remembered the funeral. The way Jason stood up with a dramatic sigh, tossing a rose onto the casket like he was signing off a business deal. Megan dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, but Lorraine never saw a single tear fall. They grieved a source of money. Lorraine grieved her anchor. Now, sitting alone on that weathered bench, she felt that ache again. But it wasn't raw anymore. It had softened into something else, a kind of sacred sorrow. The kind that doesn't demand to be seen, but simply lives in your chest and reminds you what love is supposed to feel like. She would have hated how they treated it, Lorraine said. The will, the division, the smugness, all of it. Jason had spent his share within months. Megan, too. A new car, a vacation, clothes, gadgets. Lorraine had heard whispers from extended family. Jason trying to sell some scheme. Megan begging their aunt for another loan. Lorraine never said a word, never flaunted, never mentioned the second inheritance. She didn't need to. Because the money wasn't the point. The letter was. A message sealed not in legal language, but in love. A validation she hadn't realized she needed. Not because it made her better than her siblings, but because it proved her mother knew. She always knew. That Lorraine was different. That she didn't need gifts. She needed trust. And that's what her mother gave her. With the inheritance, Lorraine had done exactly what she knew her mother would have smiled at. Expanded her design agency. Opened a new mentorship program. Helped a few young artists get scholarships. And when the hospital reached out about redecorating the pediatric wing, she donated an entire mural. Painted it herself. At the bottom corner, in tiny script, she inscribed the final line of the letter. Use it well. I know you will. Today, she carried a copy of that same mural sketch in her journal, folded behind the letter. Mom, she said, I kept my promise. The breeze stirred the leaves around her. A bird landed nearby, hopping twice before taking off again. Lorraine smiled. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if Jason or Megan would ever grow, if they'd ever understand that love wasn't about money or status, if they'd ever learn to build something instead of demanding it. But that wasn't her burden anymore. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her journal. Closed it, pressed it to her chest for a moment. And then she stood. The sun had risen higher now. The mist had burned away. She took one last look at the bench, then walked down the path, each step slow, certain, light. Her mother had left her a gift. Not just the money, but the freedom to live well, to give, to forgive, and to keep walking forward. She paused once more, just before exiting the park, and whispered, "I love you." Then, as if echoing through her bones, the final truth came back to her. She didn't leave me everything because I needed it. She left it because I understood what to do with it.